To This Week in Clown World with Ben and Hobbs. So sit back, relax, take your black pill, and enjoy the show.
Good evening, friends. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Clown World with Ben and Hobbs. I'm Hobbs. He's Ben. You're in Clown World, and boy, have things got really honky. Ben, how are we doing this week?
I'm doing well. I mean, maximum honk lately. I mean, it's not as clowny as it was. I don't know. We talked about we're gonna have to change the name of the show eventually if this keeps up.
Yeah. It's like the hits start coming, and they do not stop coming.
This
And
week in Sad World.
This is actually a sentiment that I have heard expressed by Harrison and Alex and Dan Bongino. They're like, this is hard for us to keep up with as journalists because as soon as you think you get something written down on one story, bam, something else just comes and you got to like, okay, well, this is more interesting than that other thing. So I got to start talking about this other thing now. Just one thing after another. So much that they just kind of like, was this week or was that last week or, huh?
I mean, shit. It's been what? I mean, it's barely been
3
it's not even
weeks.
3 weeks yet. Barely. It's just nonstop. I mean, there's no way they can keep up this pace. I mean, do they have that many plans they need to roll out? Is this going to be like a first 100 days thing?
I don't know.
Hard to keep up.
It's going to be very frantic, and we'll see how we go after the first 100 days. But in other news, there's a way now that people can help support us and support themselves as well. And some people may think this is funny, this is a joke, but this is not a joke. This is actually real. You can go to thealexjonesstore.com/R2L and you can buy stuff. You can buy supplements, you can buy t-shirts and hats and mugs. I mean, there's a whole bunch of merch there. Everything that you buy there, 10% of that sale gets kicked back to us. And my hope is that enough people go there and buy some stuff that they want. The 10% comes back to us, that we will invest in, say, a better camera for me, or maybe some soundproofing for this little area here that I'm in, or maybe we can start buying gear and doing gear review videos, and then we can give you a recommendation and maybe even take those gear pieces and turn around and do like a raffle or a giveaway or something. That's kind of like one of the things that I've been wanting to do for a while, but money has been so tight that I can't just, and let's be honest, audience engagement isn't really enough to drive that type of thing. We'd put up a raffle and have like a $5 entry fee, and we wouldn't get the money to pay for the piece of gear. But it's my hope now that we can maybe start doing that if people actually go out there and do that to support us.
Throwback to the only raffle we ever did was won by somebody in Czechoslovakia or something. You remember that?
Yeah, and she never did give us a picture.
So I don't know if that package was intercepted and they're in a gulag now or what, but they dropped off the face of the earth shortly after they won the raffle. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, raffle. I mean, good for the users. We have to be able to fund the merch though. That was back before we got kicked off of almost every platform. We had a much larger user base, so we could do that stuff. But it'd be nice to get back there again.
Yeah, and I will say from personal experience now that some of the supplements that they sell over there are legit. All of them, or maybe most of them, but I'm pretty sure all of the supplements that are sold over on InfoWars are just private labeled other products that are popular and effective. So if God, I don't even know like what a good example would be, but like you go to Whole Foods or something and you find like the fancy vitamins or whatever, and then you like go to the InfoWars and you find the exact same vitamins, chances are probably pretty good that they're the exact same thing, just with a different label slapped onto them. The one that I've been trying out now is the sea moss, Irish sea moss supplement. And maybe I've just got a little bit of confirmation bias and some placebo effect going on, but I actually can kind of feel it working. my workouts have been more intense. And if it's the real deal and if this is happening, I can absolutely see how Alex Jones lost 60 pounds over the last 6 months on this stuff. It's good stuff.
Raptor commented, first gear review they want is testosterone cypionate 500 milligrams a week.
I don't think I need that.
Don't think we need that much. Maybe we'll do it at 1.5 or 2, but 500 is a little much.
Yeah, that's a little much. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. There's a lot of domestic stuff going on. A lot of departments are getting axed. A lot of government employees are being fired. And then there's an awful lot of international stuff going on too. And they all are just like, it's just one thing after another. So we'll hit some of the domestic stuff first. Like, what's one thing that immediately comes to mind for you?
All the firings. I mean, it's starting to look like our government was just a bloated DEI mess like Hollywood and Silicon Valley turned out to be. Just hadn't happened yet. And, we talk about how all those, it's just money laundering for progressive causes, basically. You have an overpaid lackey who isn't doing anything but sitting at a computer. And, of course, they're going to donate to a progressive cause if they're overpaid. And it's just a money laundering scheme.
Yeah. And since I think it was like 98.8% of Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area voted Democrat, it's a tried
One of the
true.
wealthiest zip codes. It is the wealthiest zip code in the country. I mean, think of the amount of money they're funding for causes.
Speaking of that, I don't know if you noticed it or not, or saw it pop up on any of your feeds, but let's see. There it is. There has been a housing surge in the area around DC, like Arlington and DC itself. DC housing surge, 14,825 homes hit the market as the bloated government is forced to sell. Prices crash 36.5% as Trump's vision works. Bureaucrats losing their inflated real estate grip. This isn't
I've got
crisis.
it up here. Houses for sale in DC right now.
Yep.
Supply and demand, get them down. I mean, this is one of the most overpriced markets in the nation too.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, when Elon took over Twitter, he kept what, 20% of the workforce? I'm going to guess it's the same or worse for all our government agencies.
Yeah, and one of the things that came to light in one of the press conferences that he gave was that there are certain judges that are trying to block all of the firings, the layoffs, and the buyouts.
Of course they would.
And he's saying that part of the reason is that they can't do the 40 to 60,000 compensated retirements because the government is only capable of retiring 10,000 employees at a time. Because all of the government's retirement paperwork is literal paperwork. It is all done manually by hand by a team of about 900 bureaucrats that occupy a repurposed limestone mine in Pennsylvania. And everything has to be done manually, and they've been keeping the government's official retirement records in this old mine since I think it opened up in like 1952 or 55 or something. And it's literal miles of bookcases and stacks. I mean, it looks like something out of Raiders of the Lost Ark or something towards the end where they had all the boxes in the warehouse. And it's like, yeah, it's not necessarily that we don't want to lose all of these government employees. We just don't have the infrastructure necessary to actually retire them all at once. And it's like, holy shit.
Yeah. And immediate the left was like, well, that's the best way to do it. It's like, okay, so you're telling me stacks of paper in a limestone mine are better than any data center that we have. Okay, so 90% of the world's wrong, and this limestone mine with stacks of files is the right way to go.
Yeah, I'm all for redundancies and actually like analog records that you can have on your hand. That's fine, but having that be the only way that you can do it, nah, bro. It's current year. It's 2025. We can move this on now.
Well, and if they're going to bitch about the firings, I mean, and surely if we've thought of it, somebody on Trump's team has, move the offices. Okay, we can't fire you. Your new place of employment is Des Moines, Iowa.
Or if they want to take their compensated payout and get out from underneath of Trump and Elon's thumbs as fast as they possibly can, send them to the mine and they can file their own paperwork.
Yeah, just a queue at the mine to get in and file your own paperwork.
Hey, if it works.
I mean, and we've got somebody who knows a lot about queues due to his British ancestry. We've got Simon. We got Simon here. Let me bring him in.
The triumphant return of Simon. Yes. Oh, after months of absence, we missed you, man.
Yeah, the reappearance may be temporary, but it looks like what is intended to be other than temporary is the current state of near warfare between Russia and the United States, because we've had slightly conflicting accounts of the conversation that's taken place by telephone between Marco Rubio, who's taken a break from his phone parties, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister.
Mm-hmm.
And the State Department version that has been put out is extremely
it's brief.
Yeah, brief is a good word for it. And I'm just going to try and pull that up for you. Sorry, having huge difficulties.
It's not even the Cliff's Notes version. It's Cliff's Note.
So I'll read it just in case we have some other people listening. So this officially is attributable to the spokesperson called Tammy Bruce, and it says, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke today with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and is a follow-up to the President Donald Trump conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier this week that actually occurred on February 12th. Okay, the reason I'm reading this out is only 2 paragraphs. Is, if you don't mind, we'll just very quickly compare and contrast it with the Russian version. Okay, so it then says the secretary reaffirmed President Trump's commitment to finding an end to the conflict in Ukraine, and this is the kisser. Okay, this is the link to what the Russians are then going to say. It says, in addition, they discussed the opportunity to potentially work together on a number of other bilateral issues. Okay. Now, here's the Russian version. Okay. This is a big freaking story, a really big freaking story. Okay. And it's been kind of confirmed by Dugin as well, that whether he's got inside track or not, it's interesting what Dugin actually said a few hours ago as well. So the Russian version, which was not easy to find because they put it out on the Russian X and in English version on X, which had a shitty link, went to Telegram on the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That appeared to be a full account, but didn't have a link to the actual Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I went there separately. This is how the sausage gets made and this kind of stuff that I find, right? They had it there in Russian and English, and the Russian version was downloading fine and was translatable, but the English version, the download was stopping halfway. Okay, so it really wasn't obvious to any journalist who, if they were working this weekend, were watching the Munich Security Conference and not focused on the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs website or indeed the conclusion of the African Union Conference. Okay, so This is what it said, and I think this is really, really important. This is potentially a turning point in world history. Okay, so the Russian version says on February the 15th, at the initiative of the American side. Okay, that's unusual. This is what the Chinese do when they say who called who. Okay, so it's basically showing, like which foot the shoe is on. And it says Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had a telephone conversation with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Consistent with the American version, it says, building on the February 12th telephone conversation between the presidents of Russia and the United States, the two foreign ministers agreed to maintain an open channel of communication to address long-standing issues in Russian-American relations. And note they're long-standing, okay, because the rest of it shows that it's going back further back than just the last 2 years or 2.5 years in Ukraine. Okay, it says their goal is to remove unilateral barriers inherited from the previous US administration. And notice here, this is not talking about war and peace. Okay, they say these barriers have hindered mutually beneficial trade, economic and investment cooperation. Very Chinese win-win cooperation that they reiterated at the Munich Security Conference today. Their former vice foreign minister was saying that America's viewing us as a strategic competitor and we're still looking at them as a business partner. We want to do win-win cooperation. The Russian message goes on to say both sides expressed shared commitment to engaging on key international issues, plural, including the situation in Ukraine, developments in Palestine, and the broader Middle East, as well as other regional matters, plural. The conversation also covered ways to swiftly reverse the restrictions on Russian diplomatic missions in the United States, which were introduced by the Obama administration in 2016 and led to reciprocal measures. It was agreed that expert-level meetings will be organized in the near future to coordinate specific steps towards removing these obstacles to the function of diplomatic missions in Russia and in the United States. Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio reaffirmed that, note that they're reaffirmed, so this obviously happened once before as well, at least, their readiness to restore a respectful and constructive interstate dialogue in line with the approach set by the presidents. They agreed to maintain regular contact, including discussions on preparations for a potential high-level Russian-American summit.
Yep.
Okay. Now,
much more detailed.
A lot more detail, but it's not just Ukraine, and it's not just military. They're talking about the restoration of full economic and diplomatic relations between Russia and the Russian Federation and America. And so the phrase or the word that I think is most appropriate here is rapprochement, which is the restoring of cordial relations between nations. Now, this really is freaking huge. It's a really, really, really big story. Now, if you look at what Dugan has said today, after that was released by the Russian Foreign Ministry, that the reason why, as he calls him, the Zelensky clown, and nobody from the European Union are going to be present at these meetings, which in the first instance appear to be scheduled for Monday and Tuesday in Saudi Arabia. Okay, where Rubio is going. Okay, that's already been announced, and that was announced that he was going to Saudi Arabia before this telephone conversation took place. Okay, so he was going to 4 places, 2 of which are in the Middle East, and now it appears that the Russians are sending a high-level delegation. Okay, and then Rubio is going to be there. It looks like Waltz is going to be there, the national security advisor, and Witkoff. So Witkoff's remit has suddenly extended beyond Middle East coordinator and special presidential envoy to actually dealing with a lot of issues. He's suddenly really, in Trump's eyes, the go-to guy. Okay. And that's interesting considering he's basically a real estate investor, which is how Trump knows him. And it looks like the first meeting that Trump has already said is going to occur will be in Saudi Arabia. Okay. So Trump said that he's going to go to Russia, Putin's going to come to America, but before either of those visits occur, they're going to meet in essentially a neutral country, which will be Saudi Arabia. So this is a huge diplomatic feather in their cap for Saudi Arabia. Okay, and it's very, very interesting that it's happening there, not like Switzerland or the UN or Thailand or somewhere else like that. Okay, now what this means is essentially a separate piece. Okay, now Macron, the president of France, who's hanging on to his job by his fingernails, is calling an emergency meeting of the European heads of government on Monday. Okay, the British Prime Minister has put out an announcement that was reported by Sky News, who had a written copy of it, though interestingly enough, it's not on the Prime Minister's Twitter page, nor is it on the number 10 Downing Street official Twitter page. Okay, so it's literally they've given it to the press, but it's not been published in full on official social media accounts, which is very bizarre indeed. And that announcement said that the British Prime Minister was going to meet with Macron and the other European leaders in Paris on Monday, even though Britain is no longer a member of the European Union. Okay, it's obviously a major member of NATO, despite having a tiny armed force, largely as a result of its special forces and intelligence operation and membership of Five Eyes. And that after that, the British Prime Minister is going to come to Washington, D.C. This is urgent scheduling. This is not long-term plan, okay? To meet with Trump either later this week or next week, okay? And they have specifically described the purpose of his mission to see Trump as trying to maintain the unity versus Russia between the United States and Europe.
Right. I've been on Twitter a little bit more than I have been in the past lately, and I've been seeing a lot of talking heads. Some are just regular blue check mark people, but some of them have that gray check mark, which means that they're a certified, verified politician of one variety or another. Yeah. And they're saying that it's time to seriously consider constructing a pan-European army and consider kicking the United States out of NATO.
Okay, well, one, there's no provision for kicking people out of NATO. Otherwise, that would have happened to Turkey long ago. Okay,
yeah.
So that's total BS for a start. The second thing is that suggestions in the past, some of which have been actually made by Macron, for the creation of a European defence force, one have come to nothing, and instead, certainly in the case of the last 2 years, notwithstanding provision 43.6 of the Treaty of the European Union from, I believe, Lisbon, that provides for mutual defence of European nations, which is a European alternative to Article 5 of the NATO treaty, right? Is in reality, NATO has become officially the defence force of Europe.
Mhm.
Okay, so there is now a panicked discussion about what they can do on their own, and that is particularly occurring amongst the Baltic states and the other Scandinavian countries, the countries that form what is called the JEF. That's the Joint Expeditionary Force. Okay, that was created in 2014 after the Russian takeover of Crimea. Okay, and Britain is a member of that as well, and Europe has got a real identity crisis on its hands because it's closely associated with the United States, notwithstanding the potential trade war that is on the verge of breaking out, and all of their visions of transatlantic unity are crumbling literally before their eyes in the last 3 or 4 days, which has been headlined by Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, which you saw me, headlining within minutes of that occurrence because I was watching it live and I actually was shrieking with laughter as he was giving his speech. And I mean, I really was laughing a lot. And just in case other members of the audience haven't already read the transcript or seen the Elon Musk retweeted version of that, and the source of his video for that is very, very interesting. I'll explain that in just a moment. But Vance essentially said that the main threat to Europe was not from Russia or from China, but was from within Europe itself.
Yep.
And he specified 3 areas. He said they're unfettered illegal immigration, okay, and also their attacks on free speech, okay.
Mhm.
And he gave an example from England, an example from Scotland, an example from Sweden, and an example from France. Okay. No, sorry, Germany. Germany was the other example that he gave, not France. Though he could have easily done France. And so he said, this is things that your population have not voted for, and yet you're doing them. And this has received massive pushback from German Chancellor, the German Defense Minister, the President of the European Commission, and a lot of other European bigwigs who are in a real tiz about this, being called out very, very publicly by Vance. Now, it was interesting that the President of the European Commission spoke before him, and then the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke after him. Okay, the Chinese Foreign Minister got more applause at the end of his speech than the Vice President of the United States. Okay,
Yeah,
and now it turns out that China and Europe have common calls against the United States because they're both opposed to Trump's tariffs and sanctions. Okay, so actually, whilst Kellogg, who's the US presidential special envoy for Ukraine, has suggested today that part of the price for peace between Russia and the United States, which obviously is only using Ukraine as a proxy, and therefore they can conduct the negotiations because Ukraine is following clear-cut orders from the United States and has been for many years, is the suggestion that Putin will be forced to sever relations with China and with North Korea and with Iran, bearing in mind that the new strategic partnership has only been signed between the Russian president and the Iranian president on January the 17th, literally like 4 weeks ago. Okay, today, 4 weeks ago. And that appears to be like completely fantastical. That there's no way that's happening whatsoever. Those are the only countries that have stood by Russia firmly during this whole, special military operation period. So there's no way Russia is dumping any of those. But instead of breaking Russia away from China, ironically, what they seem to be doing is forcing the Europeans into the hands of the Chinese. So that is a particularly hilarious aspect of current American foreign policy. But after the Wang Yi speech, Zelensky had a panel session with 4 US senators, okay? And there was White House, and Graham was there, and another couple as well. And along with the usual crap from Graham, he had an interesting comment, which was he wanted Ukraine to be able to join NATO immediately. This is Lindsey Graham speaking as a senator, not on behalf of the administration, right?
Lindsey Graham.
But he told Zelensky that there were several other European countries that did not want that to occur. And any member of NATO can effectively veto another country from joining. They all have to agree, which is what we saw Turkey delaying the entry of Finland for a while, but Sweden for a lot, because they had a big disagreement about PKK operations in Sweden. Okay, yep. So what that appeared to do was to shift the blame onto some other unnamed European countries. Okay, but Zelensky said, well, actually, ever since I first started speaking with Biden when he was the president, he consistently told me that America was not going to agree to Ukraine joining NATO. Every time he raised it, Biden said no. So all of the stuff that we've been told at the NATO summit, if Zelensky is to be believed on this occasion, which is a big if, okay? But there's probably recordings of these conversations, despite the fact they may have been fabricated, as happened between Trump and Zelensky, right? Remember old Adam Schiff reading out the fake transcripts during the Russiagate proceedings. It looks like Austin and Blinken for 3 years have been completely lying about the inevitability of Ukraine joining NATO. Okay, so that issue, it would appear, is not the major one of any conversation between Russia and the United States. Okay, now what is interesting is that Senator Whitehouse, who's the ranking Democrat member on, I believe, the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, said that there was a supermajority, not 60 votes, a supermajority, so i.e. a vote strong enough to overturn a presidential veto to continue American support for Ukraine. So I thought that was very interesting, okay, that the House and Senate might possibly force through legislation demanding that the White House maintains support for Ukraine, and if Trump vetoes it because he doesn't want his hands tied, at least in the Senate, White House is saying that they can overturn any presidential veto.
All right. So I just wanted to, before we go on there, we have a commenter over here in the Rumble feed who's put a lot of comments in, and I appreciate you, Mr. Medi. Thank you very much for the comments. That does drive the algorithm. It does put us up in people's suggestions, so I appreciate that at the very least. But he's saying basically the gist of what he's saying here is he is predicting the possibility of an information exchange in regards to DC elites with their involvement in the corruption in Ukraine, and also the possibility of bioweapons research labs in Ukraine.
I think that the most important information that the Russians could give Trump is proof that the 2020 election was stolen from him. And Putin has specifically said that he believed that Trump was robbed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he has formed that opinion based upon information that the SVR has given him, as opposed to what he simply read in the alternative media, then that could be absolutely explosive.
Yeah, there's a number of different things that he could have information on. DC elites with corruption, bioweapons lab, Trump getting the election stolen from him. Who knows what else? Ukraine is a notoriously corrupt country with all sorts of fingers and all sorts of pies.
But don't forget also that Trump made this slightly strange comment that he'd spoken to Putin and that he'd spoken with Xi. And not only was he going to have bilateral meetings with Putin, but he was going to have a trilateral summit with both of them. Okay. And then he proposed that they denuclearize, because they all had, as he put it, enough nuclear weapons to blow the world up 50 or 100 times, which is true. And he said that he wanted to see defense spending halved.
That's going to piss a lot of people off.
That's enough to get you shot in a motorcade in Texas.
Yeah,
right there, that statement.
by possibly more than one person.
Yeah.
And so that's very, very interesting indeed. Now, bear in mind that they're trying to get rid of a $2 trillion deficit, and the Senate is trying to increase defense spending by $175 billion to smash it through $1 trillion a year.
Yep.
Okay. And so von der Leyen was saying, when she was asked whether or not the Europeans would increase their defense spending up to 5%, that there isn't a particular number, and whatever the number is, that it could be temporary just to close the gap. Okay. But she said what they needed to measure their spending to was closing capability gaps, which obviously is critical both for their airlift capability, but also their sea lift capability, which is almost non-existent for the whole of Europe. Okay. They're utterly reliant upon strategic airlift command to move stuff around. Okay. And so it is interesting that Trump wants to shift that kind of burden to them. But you saw Hegseth explaining at the defense ministers meeting that occurred in NATO just before the Munich Security Conference, when he told them that America was going to refocus its attention on other continents, which would tend to suggest that that's going to be Asia. Okay.
I predict Antarctica. Those penguins are getting really uppity.
Yeah, sure. Or either that, or there's a big resurgence of the Nazis at the base there.
Yes, the Hollow Earth base.
So that's another very distinct possibility as well. And so, this really is quite momentous events going on. And I really don't think, particularly in regard to the Russian readout and Dugin's comments concerning that phone call that occurred today, right, that either the alternative media or the mainstream media have really understood what exactly is going on. And it's much, much bigger, hugely bigger than just Ukraine. You see them talking about the whole of the Middle East and other regions in addition to Ukraine. Okay. And they're not just talking about diplomatic relations, they're talking about joint investments. So, what the heck is America and Russia suddenly going to jointly invest in?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of rewind us there because we've gone on for this for about half an hour now, and we haven't even dissected the differences between the two press releases between the State Department and the Russian equivalent. Like I was telling Ben before we even came on the air, I read both of them, and it's like the U.S. State Department release was like, yeah, we had a call, we discussed some things, and we'll keep you posted. And then the Russian one was like, hey, we discussed this, and this, and we're going to move forward on this, and this at this time. And it was a lot more detailed. And to me, I think that there's some strategy behind it because you've already got the hyperventilating media who see anything that is connected between a Trump administration and Russia as some type of collusion or whatever. They played that stupid game on his very first.
Well, they've painted Russia as the next great Marvel cinematic villain at this point.
But
Right.
what's really interesting here, though, is look at the timing, though, right? So if Rubio is in Saudi Arabia on Monday, right? Given the time difference, he's going to be there before the European heads of government even meet in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So whilst it's not the overall deal, it is the outlines of a deal between the Russians and the Americans before the Europeans have even discussed whether or not they're going to be able to present a common position to Trump, which is what the Polish foreign minister has suggested at the Munich Security Conference today. He said we need to formulate a unified plan, including apparently the British, and submit that to Trump before he concludes the deal. Okay? But the outline of that deal, look, because very rarely, there's a few exceptions, like between Reagan and Gorbachev, do the two principals meet and they actually resolve the details. Normally, they're just signing ceremonies and a banquet. Okay.
Right.
Normally, everything's been resolved by the national security advisors and the defense ministers and the secretaries of state before they even arrive. Okay. Because they don't want like a spectacular, people insulting each other and saying you promised this and you didn't promise that and you've let us down on all this kind of stuff. Okay. But bear in mind that the Russians, and Maria Zakharova reiterated that this week, we, the Russians, got bamboozled and defrauded by the Minsk II agreement. And she has specifically said there is not going to be a Minsk III. Okay? So people are concerned what security guarantees are going to be given to Ukraine. The bigger question is what guarantees are going to be given to Russia.
Right. And well, okay, so speaking of bamboozling Russia, this has been a problem, and Putin brought this up in the Tucker Carlson interview. It seems like every single time Russia acts in good faith, they bring the olive branch to the negotiating table, they lay it down, the US president picks it up and says, yes, this is great. And then he goes out of the room, talks to the men in gray suits, as Putin puts it, and then comes back in and be like, nope, we're still on bad terms. Sorry, it's out of my hands.
So
So
it's not just Minsk too. Look at the JCPOA, the US, Iran, and EU nuclear deal.
well, it goes all the way back to the early '90s. We've been playing this back and forth game with Russia since the Soviet Union fell apart.
The strategic arms reduction treaties,
Yeah,
the
all of it.
intermediate nuclear forces. There's a lot of things, open skies, that America has pulled out of. Okay.
Yeah.
And you know, America, as we've seen with Snowden, our top leaders to the Senate under oath have been lying about the extent of surveillance, even upon America's own citizens, in contravention of its domestic laws. Okay. So it appears that the administrations, plural, lie to everyone all the time, and there are never consequences for that. So the Russians are rightly very, very skeptical. Obviously they want their $300 billion back, most of which is frozen in Europe. So it's going to be hard to see how Trump is necessarily going to release that himself. But I think now there appears to be this, quote, rapprochement beginning, that there seems to be an incredible sense of urgency beyond Trump saying that he would resolve the Ukraine war in the first 24 hours. Obviously, we're in week 4 now, so that hasn't occurred. But he does appear to be trying to tie together a deal very, very quickly indeed. Now, there may be good reason for that, because it appears that Russia is on the verge of a strategic breakthrough. They take these last 2 or 3 towns in the Donbass, and then there's kind of like, what appears like open territory, great for tank breakthroughs. We know in reality that's very different because of all the drone operations. Okay.
Right.
So you can't run kind of armored columns, German advance into France, May 1940 style anymore, because everything gets blown up by drones. But even so, there's no prepared infantry positions between the towns they're currently fighting in and the Dnieper River, at which point Russia doesn't take 20% of Ukraine, it suddenly takes like a third or 40%. So, if they have good reason to believe that a collapse is imminent, then they may be trying to, cut that advance as much as possible. Now, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Bessent, right?
Yep.
Went to Kiev literally with a document that, by all accounts, he put in front of Zelensky and said, sign here. And Zelensky refused because the document said, I hereby give 50% of Ukraine's mineral wealth in perpetuity to the United States.
Ballsy.
Okay. So
that's a ballsy offer, but considering how much men, or not men, but money and material that we've offered on this stupid war, I'd say it's probably about to break even.
Well, Lindsey Graham yesterday took credit for that and claimed that it wasn't like robbery or blackmail, but it was actually more about joint investments, which was clearly bullshit. Okay. But he, in this panel interview at the Munich Security Conference with Zelensky sitting next to him, who he touched frequently in a rather disturbing kind of way, then Graham, and this apparently is why he got taken by Trump on Air Force One to the Super Bowl, which everyone was like, what the heck? Like, why is he suddenly best pals of Graham? Right? Remember, that was odd.
Yeah.
Right? Is supposedly he put a map, he claims, Graham himself in public claims, that he put a map in front of Trump showing all the rare earth mineral resources and other things like oil and gas that exist in both Ukraine and in its territorial waters, a lot of which is now controlled by the Russians, particularly around Crimea, and said we can get like half of this, which is in Lindsey Graham's view, $9.6 trillion. So half of that would be 4.8 trillion. Okay. So obviously, from the art of the deal perspective, from Trump's point of view, Trump is claiming has put $300 billion in. Now, the official records indicate that it's actually sub 200 billion, of which Zelensky claims that Ukraine has only received 75 billion of that. So if Trump's saying 300 billion and the official records are saying 177 billion and Zelensky's saying 75 billion, there's an interesting 102 to $223 billion discrepancy there. Now, I appreciate some of that has been sent directly to Ukraine, and some of that has been buying expensive new weapons to replace the shitty old, slightly dented from like Gulf War One ones that we've been giving to the Ukrainians, knowing that 50% of them would be sold to the Mexican cartels to attack America anyway. So we didn't want to give them the really good stuff, right? And so there's a large discrepancy there. But the Europeans are getting stiffed on both sides of the deal. So they're being asked to cough up 5% of their GDP on defense spending, when the average is, in many cases, below 2, like France and Germany, right? Bear in mind that last year, Boris Pistorius was talking about doubling German defense spending to 3.5%. This would require it to be tripled. But he's not going to be making these decisions anyway, because he's going to be out of office in a week, because we've got the German elections next weekend and the SPD are going to lose. Now, question is whether or not the CDU will form a coalition with the AFD, which has before always been verboten, which means forbidden. Or they have the German word for firewall, Brandenmauer or something like that. And yet, what was interesting was Vance refused to meet with Scholz, publicly refused, which was pretty insulting considering that he's effectively the prime minister of the host country of the event that he was attending, okay, in Munich.
That's
right?
a snub.
So he met with the CDU, with Merz, who's the leader of that party, which is expected to win not an outright majority, but the largest vote share, around a third, in a week's time. Okay. Now, what's very interesting is Musk retweeted the full video of Vance humiliating the Europeans to their face at the Munich Security Conference. Okay. And just below the video, it said Alice Weidel, which wouldn't mean a lot to a lot of Americans, right? But when you clicked on that, it turned out that the original source of the video was from the leader of the far right, in the European mainstream media view, Alternative for Germany AFD party. And Vance went and met with her instead of Scholz.
Oh man, that is a double
Does the
snub.
AFD have much chance of winning? I mean,
No, but they might come second. They're currently polling second. And so one thing that Scholz has been freaking out about in Munich over the last couple of days is, and Vance mentioned this in his speech. Vance said, you're upset about dealing with Elon Musk for a few weeks. He said, but we've been putting up with insults from Greta Thunberg for years, And if we can tolerate that, you can tolerate some comments from Elon Musk. And
Yep.
Vance was, really making this point about freedom of speech. And his third point that I didn't mention when I gave you those list of 3 things was the third one that he mentioned was cancelling elections. Now, 9 council elections, this is the big regional councils, have been allowed to cancel their elections in May in Britain. And the results of the first round of the Romanian presidential elections were overturned by their constitutional court based upon what it turned out to be utterly false accounts from the Romanian intelligence services that there were 25,000 Russian operated TikTok accounts that had distorted the election campaign. And it turned out that it wasn't 25,000, it was like 250. They'd literally added like 2 zeros to the number.
How many USAID TikTok accounts
Yeah,
were
well,
affecting
exactly,
the campaign?
exactly. So that's a side issue there, and he specifically named that. And the guy Georgescu, who looked like he was going to be declared the winner at least in the first round, though not with an overall majority, such that there was going to be a runoff election between the first and second places, like happened in Argentina with Milei. He is very pro peace with Russia. Okay, so, and obviously Orban is very pro peace with Russia, and Robert Fico in Slovakia is very pro peace with Russia as well. And so we have a clear distinction there. Okay,
Yep.
so I appreciate this has been quite complicated, and thank you. I hope that you've kind of like found this interesting, but
Yep.
as usual, people are not tying all the pieces together.
Right. Okay. So before we get off of here, let's kind of tie this up in a nice little TLDR bow here. So we've got somewhat of a coalition in the former Soviet Eastern Bloc countries, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and who knows, maybe some other places that are interested in not an alliance, but with just peaceful relations with Russia. And for the longest time, those kind of outlier nations have been a thorn in the side of the greater European consensus, who have been kind of saber rattling at Russia. Now we have Donald Trump coming in, who's also very interested in peace and economic and investment uh, reciprocity with Russia, entering into deals with them and garnering peace in the Ukraine conflict in order to jumpstart the world economy. You've got a potential trilateral summit between Russia, the United States, and China in order to denuclearize and slash defense spending by half. That would put a gigantic sum of money into other places in the economy, not necessarily defense spending.
Which is exactly what the Chinese suggested in the
Hmm.
Global Civilizational Initiative, which was let's not spend it on defense, let's spend it on issues like energy transition and health services and education and AI and all this kind of stuff, which are not autonomous investment, which means the production of wealth that can't be used as capital for future production,
Hmm.
but is buying weapons that you either rot in a warehouse or you blow them up,
Yep.
which doesn't actually create any economic growth at all.
Right. And stuck in the middle of all of this, you have the European Union that is still living in a very antiquated old world, Cold War style mentality where Russia is the bad guy and they will always be the bad guy. They're an existential threat to our existence. Meanwhile, they are censoring speech, canceling elections, arresting people for thought crime, all number of things that if it were happening in Russia, we would call them human rights violations and demand some type of special military action in order
As
to.
Vance said, he said, you even banned the left and right from speaking at the Munich Security Conference. He said this very conference
Yep.
is basically blinkered because you're not hearing opposing views, not just from the right wing, but also from the left wing.
Right. And like you said, Vance went over there and he kind of pantsed them on stage to their face. And like I said, I've been kind of scrolling Twitter more than I normally am, and I see the gray check marks both in our country and in Canada and in Europe. They are clutching their pearls over what Vance and Hegseth have said over there.
As I put it slightly less diplomatically, he took a massive shit in their punch bowl and then forced them to drink from it.
Exactly. So, wrapping this all up here because we are at the hour right now, Simon. Are you?
But can I just mention very quickly, please?
Yes, go ahead.
So Hegseth's speech at NATO headquarters was very significant because that's been verified by Reuters, Politico, and the FT, all of which are somewhat dubious, probably being funded by USAID until recently, and members of the Trusted News Initiative. But taking that with a pinch of salt, it appears that at the beginning of this week, a questionnaire that apparently has 6 questions on it was sent to most of the European countries, asking them to specify individual units that they were willing to send soon to Ukraine to act as peacekeeping forces if they wished to maintain a certain line of contact between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. Okay. Now, whether or not the Russians would agree to that is a different matter, but they've squarely had the ball put in the European court. Stop squealing and tell us which individual battalions you are willing to send like next quarter.
Yep.
Okay. So that's a huge problem for them now. Okay. Now, in Britain, for example, we've got the half-year financial statement about to come out from the finance secretary. Okay. And the growth forecast has been reduced. And she is telling all the government departments, you're going to have to cut, get ready for an austerity budget. She had £10 billion, $12 billion of wiggle room factored in, according to the budget that was announced in, I think, October. And all of that's gone because the extra tax revenue they thought they were going to get from the economy growing at like 2%. Now the forecast for the rest of the year is like 0.1%. So all of the growth, all the extra sales tax and income tax is out the window. Okay. And so she had said, we can't possibly raise defense spending, which is currently at 2.3% of GDP for Britain. Okay. Now, the previous government, the Conservative government, and this Labour government have said that they will increase it to 2.5% when economic circumstances allow, which is basically like never. It's like bullshit fudge. Okay. But the military have publicly, which is unusual, told the Prime Minister they need 2.65% immediately. And the Treasury Secretary in Britain has been pushing back against that, saying literally we're going to cut like libraries, pensions, and healthcare as has been the issue in France and in Germany, which has caused change of governments in both countries, right? If you want to try and increase defense spending. And all of the mainstream media were assuming that she would be successful. But in addition to the announcement that he's going to meet with Macron and the other European heads and then fly to present what is essentially an ultimatum, albeit with no teeth to back it up, from Europe to Trump in the next few days. This is the British Prime Minister doing this shuttle diplomacy. Shuttle diplomacy, bear in mind, to try and keep NATO together. That's what we're witnessing. Okay.
Mhm.
He has overruled his finance secretary and said, even though we may have to cut elsewhere, we're going to increase the defense spending from 2.3 to 2.65. So he's going beyond the fluffy election pledge to even go a bit beyond that. And this is what we're now going to have to see Germany do, and Sweden, and many, many other European countries that could see their governments fall over these issues. Being jammed through in Finland and in the Baltic states, which are now spending over 6% of their GDP, which, bear in mind, is what America was spending in the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. It was 6%. It went down to 4.5% under Carter, and then Reagan took it back up again.
Mhm.
Okay, but it basically was like 6%. So at the moment, it's way lower than that. It's about 3%, right? Three and a bit. And there's
But that 3%, when you're talking about 3% of America's GDP, is a lot more than anybody else.
yes. So America's GDP is roughly $27 trillion a year. Okay.
Yeah.
And an increasing share of that is government spending. But as other people have noted, if we cut the deficit by 2 trillion, right,
Right.
that would reduce the actual GDP by it's about it's not 10%, is it? It's a bit less than that. It's like 7.5%.
7 or 8, yeah.
Yeah,
About 7 or
right.
8.
And so that would be a massive recession, not like to depression kind of point of view. Now, one could argue how much of that is waste and fraud. Does it actually create any velocity of money, particularly if it's going overseas? And the General Accounting Office, during the final year of the Biden administration, estimated that fraud and waste in the US government budget accounted for $320 to $520 billion per year. Okay. And that was out of a total budget of $6 trillion. So they were basically saying that between 5 and 8% of the entire US government budget was fraud and waste. And that's probably a very, very accurate number. Now, we haven't even started auditing the Department of Defense yet. And Hegseth is saying that he wants that to occur. But, the last time we started doing that, the people with all of the receipts in shoe boxes, they got hit supposedly by a plane on 9/11.
Yeah, funny how that happens. I think that Elon and Hegseth, I think their food tasters better have a food taster.
Yeah. So that's looking a little bit dicey. So watch this space for what happens in Saudi Arabia on Monday and Tuesday. It's going to be freaking huge news. It's like the 17th and 18th of February, and this is just this is really, really big. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I mean, obviously the Chinese have been massively expanding their nuclear forces. They're building a new Chinese Ministry of Defense 70 miles to the west of Beijing that is 10 times the size of the Pentagon. Okay, they're launching their third aircraft carrier with like, full top spec. The French have just announced their replacement for the Charles de Gaulle, which is ancient, and even though that did undergo a massive refit, and this is causing huge problems for these governments. And so, it's interesting that we now have a Kennedy back in government again, because this was precisely the peace dividend that Kennedy wanted to see in the early 60s, right? And that we were promised when we won the Cold War. Bush, the elder, was talking about the defense budget being reduced by a third, and it never was.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these reductions are long overdue. If people are thinking of trading this, then the defense stock index volatility is definitely something to watch, because even if this doesn't come to pass, just saying that it might and then not again and then might is going to make it go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down.
Buy the dip.
No. You don't even have to do that, right? You don't have to make a directional bet. You just have to think that it's going to go up and down and oscillate a lot. That's called the volatility. So you can make money being along the volatility without actually calling it right in whether or not it ends up or ends up down. What does appear is that there's going to be huge political changes and pushback potentially from the US Senate and the deep state and the military industrial complex, that either way will certainly make for a lot of oscillation. So obviously people should do their own research, speak to their own investment advisors, not trust anything that I'm saying, since I have been known to be wrong on occasion. And so that's definitely something that I will be watching in the coming days.
Yeah, so a couple of things to go over there. You're talking about how the UK is talking about increasing their defense spending, even if it means they have to cut a lot of their other public spending. And a recent poll that I heard about puts that less than 11% of British young people would willingly fight in a war for the UK. So even if they had the money, they don't seem to have the manpower. And far be it. Well, I'm just going to say that, far be it for me to, speculate on this, but considering how the rest of Europe has a very similar anti-nationalist malaise combined with the demographic changes, shall we say, over the last couple of decades, I would imagine that the sentiment among the other nations of Europe are probably somewhat similar, if not worse.
So there are some exceptions in the Baltics, Poland, and Finland and Sweden, which actually have maintained conscription, albeit it's been quite easy to dodge out of them by doing like alternative community Peace Corps type service instead. And even Finland, I believe, has only been calling up 10% of the people per year that it legally could have. Okay, but they are going to have to find bodies to man the equipment. And if you're talking about tripling defense spending, that's not all AI and drones. That's a lot of tanks, trucks, planes, and rowboats in the case of the Swiss Navy. And they're going to need bodies to do that, and that's going to require mass conscription. It's going to require the draft across Europe.
And they're not going to be happy about that.
And most of those governments are not going to survive that.
Nope. Absolutely
particularly
not.
If the alternative is Trump's global peace plan.
Yeah.
So shall we fight for nothing, or shall we do a global peace plan? That's a pretty easy choice.
Well, it kind of all depends on whether or not the media can gaslight these people into believing that this is actually Trump and Russia uniting to take over the world, as opposed to being a peace plan. But we're going to wrap things up right here. But dare I say, Simon, our perpetual black pill dispenser, sounds uncharacteristically optimistic about things, unless I'm completely misreading your tone of voice over the last hour. Are you thinking that this has a chance of maybe making things better in the long run?
I think. I mean, Trump is talking about the new golden age for America. Okay, and the last great golden age was after divine intervention saved Britain from the Spanish Armada, and that then led Queen Elizabeth I in a prolonged period of peace to bring about what is known as England's golden era. So maybe Trump is modeling his plans on that by either his brilliance, possibly even more brilliant than God himself in his eyes, causing world peace, that the direction of funds instead into proper economic growth may actually bring about the next golden era for the United States. And I can see a certain amount of logic behind that line of thought.
Let's just hope that everything works out and the 4D chess plays out according to plan.
But the U.S. Senate may steal defeat from the jaws of victory in that regard.
Let's hope everybody gets on side then. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. If you guys are interested in joining us tomorrow, I will be interviewing the social media guy / CEO / sole proprietor / does everything guy from Rebels Raiders. He is going to be having his gear drop on February the 26th. We're going to be going over it. We were supposed to do that last Sunday, but he had his samples out to various other social media influencers, and we decided to push it back a week so that we could get everything on camera. And the other thing is, like I said at the beginning of the show, if you want to support us, you can go to Liberty.com and get some of our freedom swag, or you can go to the AlexJonesStore.com/R2L and buy something, and we get 10% of that funneled back to us. So that's two ways that you can support us as of right now. Ben, you got anything? You're muted. You're still muted. I guess he doesn't have anything then. Simon, you got anything for us?
No, just it's been a pleasure chatting with you guys again. I know it's been 2 or 3 months. Unfortunately, for health reasons, my alternative media participation has been greatly and possibly permanently curtailed. So it has been a pleasure. Can't promise to be doing this again regularly, but I did feel that this was very, very important information. So it's been great to chat with you again.
Right. You'll always have a place here. I will continue to send the link every week we do a show, and you come on anytime you want to, Simon. You're always welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Well, since Ben is currently struck mute by God, I guess I will say that until next week, friends, stay honky.